Okay, so the BBC World Service has posted a link to a case about issues around arranged marriages. So I'm just going to read this out. I've now managed to do the split screen so I can read directly, which is good because before I had to do this thing where I actually took a picture of the report to read it out. So this is more convenient. This is from the BBC World Service on Facebook. Jasvinder Sangera grew up in a large Sikh family in the UK. Rather than be forced to marry a much older man, she ran away from her home. My mother said either you come back and marry who we say, or from this day forward you are dead, are now dead in our eyes. Jasvinder Sanghera, who is the founder of Karma Nirvana. I assume that's a charity helping people involved in these situations. She was only 16 when she ran away from home. There's a lot of issues to be raised with this. The most obvious one is that so-called cultural relativism simply mustn't be prioritized when human rights are involved. Now, someone when I made this point on the link, and there was a consensus in the views, but I made that point, and someone somewhat smugly put this link to the government showing what people can do in the case of forced marriages. The point he was making was that it is illegal, but the problem is that that isn't the issue here. Anyway, this is from the government website. Contact the forced marriage unit if you're trying to stop a forced marriage or you need help leaving a marriage you've been forced into, and there's help numbers there. Call 999 in emergency. A trained professional will give you free advice on what to do next. Okay, so that resource is there, but it's good that it's there, but the guy that responded to me was missing the point. And the point is there is still this notion of sensitivity. And it's not that there aren't police and legislators who have good intentions and they know that this is a problem, they want to do something about it. I think the problem is there is still this culture of being too reluctant to touch on taboo issues when it affects a minority community. And this simply comes down to the most regressive, spineless sort of political correctness. It's not necessarily any individual's fault, but it is a culture that has been allowed to develop. I mean, the politically correct culture. So, to be clear, no young woman, or young man for that matter, should be in a situation where they're being forced to marry someone against their will. Now, people will say, oh, but in Britain, this was the case. You know, years ago, you could read in any Jane Austen novel or, any classic novel, there's many examples of arranged marriages within the British context. But the point is that is the past. We have moved on from then. So I don't think it's hypocritical to raise these issues and say this is a problem. That is our past. And it's an aspect of our past that's not good. I know there are people who say some arranged marriages end up happily. Well, that's fine, but it is the principle that is the issue. People should be allowed to determine their own destiny when it comes to love. And these conservative parents who think that they can control their sons and daughters in this way, they need to understand that when they live in the United Kingdom, this goes against our values of personal sovereignty. And it is a human rights violation because it is forcing them into potentially a life of unhappiness, potentially abuse, and it's just plain wrong. So yes, the resource is there, but there needs to be a change in culture whereby the police are not afraid to act. And by the way, I'm not saying that any police force doesn't act, but there have been situations. Um, we know what happened with the Rotherham abuse scandal. And frankly, I think there are situations where police forces will look at a situation and they will weigh it up and say, oh, is this going to cause community friction? So maybe we just lay off a little bit. I don't think that's exaggerated. I think there has been clear examples of that sort of mentality taking hold. And I'm not pointing to any individual, but it is a culture that needs to be, turned over. Um, Likewise, legislators should not be afraid of speaking out and saying this is a problem and the Sikh community needs to address it, or the Hindu community, or the Muslim community. We need to stop being politically correct for fear of offending minorities. Because the irony of this is it's not progressive. It goes against human rights because it then becomes apathetic. Within the United Kingdom, we should absolutely not suggest, not offer, insist that our basic values are respected. And if people don't like that, they should get the hell out. And I include people who were born here. They should go to somewhere where this sort of regressive logic is seen as acceptable. It doesn't matter if some arranged marriages end up happily. That really isn't the point. Because nobody should be forced into a marriage against their will. Period. End of stop. Full stop. Um, so yeah, I'll just leave that out there. And to Sikh people or Hindu people or Muslim people, and I'm aware the situation isn't always religion based. Very often it's cultural based, coming from a particular community in a particular part of the world, as opposed to necessarily religious logic. I mean, when we take Islam, for instance, there's strict interpretations of Sharia, and there's not so strict. There's a huge difference, for instance, between Indonesia and Pakistan. Yeah, they're both Islamic countries, so that's just show that there's not necessarily blanket situations here, but wherever there is a contradiction with British values, that must be challenged. Because if we don't stand up for our values, then it's meaningless. And having legislation alone isn't enough. There has to be a change in rhetoric so that legislators are not afraid to speak out and, you know, in case they get accused of being racist or any other nonsense. Um, if you don't like the laws of the land, then either you peacefully campaign to discuss those laws or you get out. It's that simple. But I take the view one country, one law. There shouldn't be any exceptions for, frankly, minority groups. And if that offends people, then, it's something that needs to be said because this is a human rights matter. So I'll leave it there. Let me know your thoughts. In my opinion, anything that violates basic British values, and what do I mean by British values? I mean freedom of expression, I mean gender equality, I mean the right to self determination in these sort of issues. These things have to be respected. And we must insist on it, not offer it, not suggest it, insist on it. And yeah, I do think there should be legal consequences because even if the parents, they say that she's dead in their eyes. So even if there is not abuse involved, and frankly there are, there's a lot of young girls from northwest England go missing every year in Pakistan. Obviously, Pakistan, is beyond our jurisdiction. We can't put pressure on the Pakistani government. But when it is within the UK, we must be a lot more assertive, in my opinion. Um, and so-called community leaders need to speak out and say this is wrong. We recognise this is wrong. We respect British values. There should be a challenge to any sort of walls of silence and a culture of denial that say, "Oh, this doesn't happen in our community." If you know this happens in your community and you say that, and you're a liar, shame on you. So it has to be called out. It's that simple. Um, what I was going to say is, even if there's not violence involved against her daughter or son, it's it's putting them in a situation where a young person could be made destitute, homeless. For what? Because they won't subscribe to their parents' primitive logic. I think that's disgraceful. I think when someone is a minor, parents have a moral obligation to look after them, unless they're committing crimes, in which case it's a case for the state to intervene. But, this young woman was 16. We're not talking about someone who's 29 or 35, 16 years old. She felt in such an awful situation that she had to run away from home. So there should be absolutely no situation of forced marriage in this country. And it shouldn't be a situation, this is a backup of people who feel they need to use it because, frankly, they may not know about this resource. It needs to be promoted. I'd be all for television advertisements saying, this is wrong, and if you're in this situation, call this number. I'd be absolutely for that in order to increase awareness and provide a resource for these people because they might not even know about the existence of this. But then advertising authorities would be afraid that it offends minorities. That is the culture that we're dealing with. And it's infuriating because it is putting sensitivities before human rights. Let me know your thoughts.